American giant doubled down on local manufacturing during the pandemic. It paid off. Many fashion brands believe it's nearly impossible to manufacture their products in the US after all. Only 3% of apparel sold in the country is made locally. But Bayard Winthrop, American giant CEO, says it's not as hard as you might think. Since he launched the brand a decade ago, he's been painstakingly building out a local supply chain, using American factories and sourcing all materials locally whenever possible, from cotton to zippers. And in the midst of the pandemic, when most brands were scrambling to stay afloat, American giant took on the challenge of launching a new product category, high-performance outerwear, which required finding new factories and suppliers who could make them from start to finish. Winthrop has been advocating for other apparel brands to join him in making products in the US for years. His arguments seem to fall on deaf ears. But the pandemic appears to be changing minds by exposing vulnerabilities in the global supply chain. Big apparel has contorted itself around this enormously complicated and fragile supply chain to save pennies. Winthrop says, when a pandemic hits or a tanker gets stuck in the Suez Canal, it disrupts everything. Brands are beginning to see that when your supply chain is domestic, you're inoculated from all of that. Today, Winthrop is still obsessed with creating garments locally. In 2021, he set out to design and create a high-performance jacket in the United States. Even though the vast majority of outerwear is now made overseas because it requires extensive needlework, the most expensive part of the process, he went through his contacts and eventually discovered several apparel factories that make military uniforms and other garments adjacent to outerwear. As American giant grows, Winthrop wants to expand into even more apparel categories, but is also intent on showing the rest of the industry that it's possible to set up a supply chain from scratch. By mentoring other CEOs and introducing them to his network of suppliers and factories. And across the country, other brands are showing similar interest in local manufacturing. I recently reported about how designer Tracy Reese moved her headquarters from New York to Detroit, where there's a growing apparel manufacturing hub. She now has a workshop and sample room where she manufactures a fifth of her collection, and counting. Winthrop is encouraged by this shift in thinking and believes there's more we can do to build a movement around local manufacturing. For one thing, companies can lobby the federal government to create incentives like tax breaks for brands that make products in the US. Retailers can commit to buying a portion of their clothes from American-made brands, like Walmart has done. And consumers can play a part in asking their favorite brands to consider making products here. You can see the momentum beginning to build, says Winthrop. Brands are now taking the question of local manufacturing seriously, and customers are beginning to demand it because they want to buy from brands that align with their values. We're at a very interesting time for the movement.